In a society where women were explicitly subservient, God raised up women as influential, inspiring, and indispensable parts of his grand redemptive plan. Hey, what's up? This is Brandon Cleaver, and I'm excited to bring you the second video in my Unmasking the Myths of Christianity series for the Jude 3 Project. Poetry has always been a big part of my life, whether that's in the form of my own writings or reading the likes of Langston Hughes, Phyllis Wheatley, Countee Cullen, Gwendolyn Brooks, and the list goes on and on. I suppose poetry has always been alluring to me because of its inherent rhythmic self-expression. Now, one such poem that radiates this quality is Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou. This poem resonates with me because it makes me think of the women in my life who helped shape me into who I am today. Now, in the final stanza of this poem, Angelou writes, "Now you understand just why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it ought to make you proud. I say it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palm of my hand, the need for my care. Because I'm a woman phenomenally, phenomenal woman, that's me." Now, when you read the whole poem, you can feel this overarching sense of pride, worth, and dignity that Angelou exudes through her words. But unfortunately, historically, women have not been treated with such immeasurable value. In fact, there's this notion that the disparaging of women is inherent to the Bible. So for this session, I'd like to briefly discuss whether the Bible perpetuates the inferiority of women. We'll examine this question based through the ideas of value and vocation. Now, right from the beginning of the Bible, we see the value God has bestowed on both women and men alike. In the very first chapter of the book of the Bible, Genesis, we find that God created both male and female in his image. Now, scholars have debated what being made in quote unquote his image means, but suffice it to say, it refers to our preeminent status and has implications for how we function amongst the rest of God's created beings. You know, I love how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. puts it in a sermon he preached in 1965. While using the equal significance of black and white keys of a keyboard as an analogy, he says that there are no gradations in the image of God. He's saying that degrees or a hierarchy in those created in God's image does not exist. Equal value are found in both men and women, not because of any societal norms that can shift and change at a whim, but because both women and men are stamped with intrinsic, immeasurable, and identical objective worth by God. But the story becomes a bit less clear as to the value of women as we move throughout the Bible. We see the majority of the stories focused on men, and at first glance, it could seem like women are often, not always, but often, an afterthought. But a closer look at some of their vocations, I think, reveals the stunning and important ways in which God used women throughout the biblical narrative. Before we look at a few of the more important women in the Bible, it's important to understand the context of the ancient Near East. They lived in a patriarchal agrarian culture, which was societies that placed men in various primary power roles within the family structure and in society, and its economy was largely dependent upon agriculture. As Dr. Willie Jennings puts it in his commentary on the book of Acts, the overwhelming realities of survival and support in cultures such as these had widows and orphans hang on only by threads of mercy. This wasn't a society that reflected the inherent and equal dignity and value of women. Yet in spite of this, we find many women in the Bible bucking this trend and showing how phenomenal and integral to the biblical narrative they are through various vocations. Now, there are some of the more well-known women, such as Jesus' mother Mary, Rahab, etc. But instead, I want to mention a few that have smaller but still very inspiring and instructive roles. Now, when you hear the name Miriam, what comes to mind? Oftentimes, her narrative begins and ends with the incident where her skin is afflicted, but that only constitutes a small portion of her story. You rarely hear words such as strong and courageous associated with her. But the fact is that in many ways, Miriam was a pioneer. She had a leadership role and was the first female prophet. She was described as a prophetess when leading the Israelites in a song of praise after Pharaoh's army was destroyed. And in the book of Micah, when God is reprimanding the Hebrews, he said, "I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam." So yes, Moses was the primary leader, but Miriam had an important role right alongside Aaron as well. Furthermore, the Talmud, the central text for Judaism, states that 3 great leaders led Israel: Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. According to one resource, her presence was so important throughout the Jewish tradition that during the Maccabean era, Miriam was one of the most common names given to girls. And then there was Huldah. Now, we aren't given much information about her, but we can glean that she was a highly respected, intelligent, God-fearing woman who was in close communion with God. In the book of 2 Kings, King Josiah sent messengers to seek her advice about a book of the law that was recently discovered. Now, this is no small detail. There were surely male prophets during this time, but Josiah sought the advice of Huldah, and her counsel resulted in King Josiah instituting sweeping reforms that aligned with obeying the law and God's commands. It was the prophetic guidance of Huldah, a respected and admirable woman in a society where that was far from the norm, who resulted in the removal of idols, the sending back of priests to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, and other actions that ultimately brought glory to God. And the last woman that I want to briefly highlight is one in which the main problem being addressed in this video is realized throughout the biblical translation history. In Romans chapter 16, there's a woman named Junia, who's referred to not only as an apostle, but an outstanding one. Although Junia was recognized as a woman in early church history, in later years, Bible translators began to change her name to Junius, signifying a man, because they didn't believe a woman could be an apostle. Thankfully now, this woman, who essentially had been removed from the annals of history, is now widely recognized as the first woman apostle. The early church father, Chrysostom, had this to say about her: even to be an apostle is great, but also to be prominent among them, consider how wonderful a song of honor that is. For they were prominent because of their works, because of their successes. Glory be, how great the wisdom of this woman that she was even deemed worthy of the apostle's title. There are many other questions to be addressed regarding women and the Bible, some of this self-imposed by traditions and not by the Bible itself. But I'll end by saying that I hope that this brief sketch gives you some confidence in understanding that God does not see women as inferior. In fact, quite the opposite. In a society where women were explicitly subservient, God raised up women as influential, inspiring, and indispensable parts of His grand redemptive